need the microphone. I could project to the back of the room without a problem, but we have the people online that if I don't use the microphone, it's just like I'm up here miming. So we got to have some sort of stuff going through the system. Just hang a choir mic right in front of me. That would work. Yeah. All right. Well, good morning. Today is the final Sunday before Election Day. If you didn't know that, Tuesday is Election Day. And we're going to actually do a message today that, believe it or not, I actually did a little over a year ago. It was actually back in March of 22. And as I was coming and trying to figure out what to do today, God reminded me about this message. And I said, well, I've already done that. Why would I do it again? He said, yeah, well, there's a lot of different people here this time. They need to hear it too. So I'm letting you know that this is a message, at least in part. I have changed bits of it, but this is a message I've actually done before. You can actually go back into our YouTube and you could hear it again back in March of 22. But God really wanted this to come out again, so I wanted to make sure that I was obedient in that as well. We're going to be in Exodus 18. So if you're in your Bibles, Exodus 18 is where you want to be. And that's for the most part where we're going to be the whole time. Let me kind of give you a little bit of background before we get there as you're turning to Exodus 18. Bit of a background. God's chosen people, Israel, have been slaves in Egypt. They've been enslaved for 40 years. They are 400 years. 400 years. And they are finally at the point where Moses is coming and they're about to leave Egypt. So Moses comes in. He tells Pharaoh to let the people go. Pharaoh says no. There's 10 plagues. And Pharaoh finally says, okay, fine, go. Moses and all of Israel literally plunder Egypt and leave. And they get all the way to the Red Sea and they're blocked. I actually did a message a couple weeks ago about the pillars, right? When that's what's going on in this case. So we have, they're trying to get through the Red Sea. They can't. They're boxed in. Egypt changed their mind. They're coming after them. And Moses goes to God. God makes a way to literally have them go through the Red Sea on dry land. And they come out the other side. And then they wander in the wilderness day after day after day after day for 40 years. They're wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. What we're going to be talking about today in Exodus 18 comes in that wandering. Okay? So Exodus 18, starting in verse 1, says this. It says, now Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law. Okay, so Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. He heard about everything that God had done for Moses and how Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took in Moses' wife Zipporah after he had sent her away, and her 2 sons, one of whom was named Gershom. For Moses said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And the other's name was Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help and saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, I think we are getting the idea that it's his father-in-law, right? Came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was camped at the mountain of God. And he sent word to Moses saying, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons with her. Okay, stop there for a second, verse 6. Basically what's happening here real quick is that Moses, when he went into Egypt to take the Israelites out, he left his wife and sons with his father-in-law and said, I don't want, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't want something bad to happen to you either. And they're not Israelites. So he didn't want to have them getting caught up in the crossfire, basically. And he said, I want you to stay here, stay safe. Well, Jethro, his father-in-law, hears that all the amazing things that have happened with Israel. I went through the Red Sea and stuff like that. So Jethro's like, I think this is good now. I think I can bring your wife and your kids to you. So he's announcing to Moses that he's on his way to him. Okay. Verse 7. Then Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and he bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their welfare and went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law everything that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all of the hardship that had confronted them on the journey and how the Lord had rescued them. Verse 9, and Jethro rejoiced over all the goodness which the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hands of the Egyptians. So Jethro said, blessed be the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they acted instantly against the people. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law before God. And it came about the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. Okay, so Jethro shows up. They basically have a party. They're excited to meet each other. They're catching up. This is what happened. Moses is telling Jethro straight out, this is what occurred. And he says, hey, I know that your God is the God of all gods. Like that anything that I used to believe is kind of rubbish compared to your God because of what you've just told me. And that's great. So they decide to have an offering. Jethro says, I want to actually make an offering to your God. And he and Moses and Aaron go and do that. And they sit down and they basically have a meal together. The next day, Moses sits down to judge the people. And the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So he sits down in the seat of judgment, Moses does, and he sits there all day long hearing people complain about whatever they're complaining about. And he is the judge to determine what's going to happen to each of these problems. Verse 14, now when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this thing that you're doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge and all the people stand before you from morning until evening? Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to inquire of me and to God. And when they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between someone and his neighbor to make known the statutes of God and his laws. Moses' father-in-law then said to him, the thing that you're doing is not good. Moses said, look, they all come to me with their problems because I'm the leader. I'm the one that goes to God, and God tells me what's supposed to happen, and then I tell them the result, what's going to happen. And Jethro says, look, I get that part. God talking through you is great, but you doing this alone, that's not a good thing. In 40 years of wandering through the desert, do you think that there were some problems that happened? Yeah, right? There's going to be territorial disputes and just, I don't like you today disputes and things like that, right? And they come to Moses every single day and tell Moses their problems from morning until evening. Imagine that is your life, that you're sitting down every day, all day, hearing nothing but complaints from the people that were just rescued from slavery in Egypt. They complained about everything to Moses. So Jethro, his father-in-law, said, hey, what's happening? I like that God's talking through you. I get that. That's good. But you doing this by yourself is a bad thing. You should not be doing this alone. So Jethro offers Moses a governmental system to help. So which one should they use? We know that there's a whole bunch of different governmental systems, but what should they use? The best thing for us to do would be to look in the Bible. What does the Bible say about government? What are the different kinds of government even in the Bible? So let's take a look at a few. The first one that we could have chosen was sheer anarchy, right? Anarchy is basically the lack of government. In fact, it's defined as a state or society without a government or law. Literally, there's no government, there's no laws. You can do whatever you want. Anarchy, believe it or not, is in the Bible. Judges 17:6 says, in those days, Israel had no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's anarchy. You do what you think is right. Judges 18:1, in those days, Israel had no king. Judges 19:1, in those days, Israel had no king. Judges 21, in those days, Israel had no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This is literally what anarchy is. It's We have no government. We have no system. We're just going to do what we think's right. And if you disagree with me, I don't care. Is that a viable government possibility? No, not really. In fact, the cycle of Judges kind of proves that. If you don't know, there's a cycle in Judges where Israel disobeys God, Israel gets oppressed by some foreign nation, Israel ends up crying out to God saying, "We're being oppressed, help us." God sends a judge to help them. He brings them out of their torment. And once that judge dies, they go back to disobeying God and get put back into captivity again. That cycle goes over and over and over and over throughout all of Judges. That is the system of anarchy. That is what would occur if you have an anarchy government. You will do what's right in your own eyes until someone comes along and says, "I don't like what you're doing. I'm taking you over." And then you cry out to God for help. He sends somebody to help until that person goes, and then you go right back to it again. In fact, Proverbs actually has a bunch of other verses that talk about this. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it's the way of death." There's a way that seems right to a person, but in the end, you're just going to die. Proverbs 12:15, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." In other words, I can't believe that I know everything. I can't say that I'm the one that has the answer to every law and every governmental position. I'm going to listen to advice. Proverbs 26:12, "Do you see a man that is wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him." This is all what the Bible is saying about this idea of doing it on your own. Saying, I don't need anybody else. I'm just going to do it by myself. I'm going to believe what I believe. I'm going to live the way I want to live. I don't care what anybody else says about me. You're living in anarchy. That really doesn't work. So what's another option? Well, I mean, all throughout the Judges, it says in those days Israel had no king. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe if they had a king, then they would actually do it. So let's look at monarchy then. A monarchy. Monarchies are all through the Bible too. It's actually defined as a nation in which the supreme power of the government is in a monarch or a king or a queen. A single person rules everything. One person rules it all. These Judges verses kept mentioning that, so maybe that's the answer. So let's look at 1 Samuel 8. 1 Samuel 8, starting in verse 4, says, "Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, 'Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Appoint a king to judge us like the other nations.' But this matter was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.' And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told Samuel, 'Listen to the voice of the people regarding all that they said, because they have not rejected you, they have rejected me from being their king.' They said, 'Give us a king like everybody else.' And God said, 'Do what they asked.' They're not rejecting you. You don't have to be upset about this. They rejected me." So Samuel does what he says, but Samuel warns them. I mean, he gives them a strict, straightforward warning about what a monarch would do. Let's keep reading verses, starting in verse 11. It says, "This will be the practice." This is Samuel. "This will be the practice of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and put them in his chariots for himself and among his horsemen, and they will run before his chariots, and they will appoint for himself commanders of thousands, commanders of 50s, and some to do his plowing and other to gather in his harvest. And they will make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. And he will also take your daughters and use them as perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves, and make them and give them to his servants. And he will take a tenth of your seed and your vineyards and give them to his high officials and his servants. He will also take your male servants and your female servants and your best young men, your donkeys, and he will use them for his work. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his servants. Then you will cry out on that day because of your king to whom you chose for yourself, but the Lord will not answer you on that day." Samuel warns them and says, if you put a king over you, he is going to take everything from you to the point where you will be his slave. And when you cry out, this isn't going to be like the judges cycle. God will refuse to answer you because he's warning you right now. This is a bad idea. What was Israel's response? We want a king. We want to be like everybody else. So how did it turn out? How did monarchy work for him, right? How did it work? Well, the first king, Saul, he started pretty good. He actually did what he was supposed to do for the most part. And then he started disobeying God and literally like fell off a cliff. He actually went crazy and started trying to kill people that looked at him weird, basically. And he went from an okay king to being awful. David, the second king, started out really good. He actually is called a man after God's own heart. And then he also kind of went downhill and started going crazy. And this was about the time where he started, having affairs with other guys' wives and things like that. He ended up losing his family, just went nuts. His son actually went against him and tried to kill him in certain time. It was a really bad situation. He's a terrible father. But then at the end, he kind of started pulling out a little bit and tried to do the best he could to hand everything to Solomon. Solomon, the third king, started out great. He had it all. They said in the days of Solomon, silver was piled up in the streets like rocks. It had no value. That's how much they had in Israel. He started great. And then he started marrying all 300 wives. He started marrying everybody. They remember back then they were marrying to have alliances. I'm going to marry the princess over here so that you understand that I'm not going to attack you. You're not going to attack me because, you don't want anything bad to happen to your kid. So he had 300 wives, but God said specifically earlier, don't do that because they will lead you away from me. You're going to try to appease their gods. Don't do that. He did it, 300 wives, and what did he do at the end? He started going after their gods. We have the wisest man who ever lived that couldn't figure out not to do anything other than follow God. And just so you know, that sounds awful, right? Those three? Those three are known as Israel's golden age. They were the best three. It went way downhill after that. Let me give you a couple examples. 1 Kings 15. King Nadab did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the ways of his father and committing the same sin his father had caused Israel to commit. Later on, verse 34, King Baasha did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the ways of Jeroboam and committing the same sin that he caused Israel to commit. 1 Kings 16:13, Elah did evil in the eyes of the Lord, caused Israel to sin. Verse 19, Zimri did evil and caused Israel to sin. 26, Omri did evil and caused Israel to sin. Are you noticing the idea here that if you have a bad ruler, the country goes the way of the ruler? However the king led, that's the way Israel went. If the king said, worship this calf, they worshiped the calf because the ruler said to. On the rare occasion that they had a good king, I think there was only like 3 of them. On the rare occasion they had a good king, they prospered. Everything went well with them for the time of that king. And then that king died, his son came in, did evil, and they all went back down again. That's what a monarchy does. That's what Samuel warned against. So anarchy is not an option. Monarchy is not an option. So how about a democracy, right? Democracy is what everybody in the world says is the best thing ever, right? You hear it on the news all the time. We need to protect democracy. We have to make sure that everyone has a democracy. Make sure we save our democracy. This person's a threat to our democracy. You hear it all the time. So democracy has to be a great thing. In fact, democracy is defined as a government of the people in which the majority have sole power. That seems okay, right? The majority has the power. Whoever has the votes gets to make the rules. In shortened terms, we could call that like mob rule. If you have enough votes, you win. It's got to be a great thing. After all, the U.S. is a democracy, right? If you asked, I'm not being facetious, if you were to go into Congress and ask every one of our however many hundreds of representatives and senators, are we a democracy? The vast, vast majority would say, yes, we are a democracy. But that would have been news to our founders. Our founders would have went, what? No. We thought about democracy, and it was a terrible idea. You want proof? Here's a whole bunch of quotes. Ready? James Madison, the father of our Constitution, said democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Democracies, violent in their deaths. John Adams said, remember that democracy never lasts long. It wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There has never been a democracy yet that has not committed suicide. Fisher Ames, he's the actual, most people don't know who he is. He's the author of the First Amendment. He said, democracy is a volcano which conceals the fiery materials of its own destruction. It's a volcano that conceals the material of its own destruction. Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush is probably the most underrated founding father ever known to man. He did everything. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration. He founded the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. He was a Surgeon General during the Revolution, among 1,000 other things. He literally did everything, and he was from Pennsylvania. And it's sad that most of us don't even know who he is. But anyway, Benjamin Rush said, a simple democracy is one of the greatest of evils. These are our founding fathers and what they say about democracy. My favorite one, though, is from Benjamin Franklin. I don't have it up there, bud, so don't think I missed something. Benjamin Franklin said that a democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. It's two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Yeah, right? There's actually a tail end to that thing that says, but liberty is a well-armed sheep contesting the vote. Again, democracy is a government ruled by the majority, mob rule. Basically, if you have 51% of your vote, if you have 51% of the vote, you could make murder legal. Because it's whoever has the most votes wins. So where's this in the Bible? Well, remember that thing about making murder legal? Let's look at Mark 15. Mark 15 says, now at Passover feast, he used to release to them any one prisoner whom they requested. They're talking about Pilate. And the one named Barabbas had been imprisoned with the rebels who had committed murder in the revolt. And the crowd went up and began to ask Pilate to do as he had been accustomed to do for them. Pilate answered, saying, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews, Jesus? Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd and asked him to release Barabbas to them instead, a murderer. And responding again, Pilate said, then what should I do with the one that is called King of the Jews? And they said, crucify him. But Pilate said, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. Intent on satisfying the crowd because they had enough votes, Pilate released Barabbas, the murderer, and then killed Jesus. All they needed was the mob to tell them what to think. And then the most innocent person who has ever lived was convicted to death for no crime. Mob rule is not a valid way to govern. So let's go back to Exodus 18. How then did Jethro recommend that Moses should govern? Exodus 18, starting in verse 18, he says this, you will surely wear out both yourself and these people who are with you because the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. That's Jethro saying, look, you can't do this by yourself. You need help. Now listen to me, and I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. That's great. Jethro is like, I'm on board with God being with you. That's what you need. You be the people's representative before God, and you bring the disputes to God, but then admonish them about the statutes and the laws, and make known to them the way in which they are to walk and the work that they are to do. Furthermore, here it is, ready? Furthermore, you shall select out of the people able men who fear God, men of truth, who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them judge the people at all times, and let it be that they will bring to you every major matter. But they will judge every minor matter themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will carry the burden with you. If you do this thing and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will also go to their places in peace. He says, you need help. Put people over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Or perhaps we could look at that as put people over the federal government, the state government, the county government, and the local government. Sounds like us. In fact, the actual founding fathers quoted this verse, Exodus 18:21, as the foundation for our republic. Exodus 18:21 is the foundational verse for our government, where he says, again, let me reread it. 18:21 says, furthermore, select out of the people able men who fear God, men of truth, who hate dishonest gain, and you will place them as leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. This form of government is called a republic. It's what our national founders created for us, but they all got it from this verse. The governmental style lasted from that moment all the way until the death of Joshua's generation, and that's when the judges began, the whole anarchy system. Why did it fail? Well, when Joshua died, there arose a generation, actually says this in the Bible, there arose a generation that didn't know Joshua and didn't know that they crossed the Red Sea. They didn't know the God of Moses, and they fell into anarchy. There arose a generation that did not know our leaders, their history, or their God. And then they fell to anarchy. If you're not thinking right now, man, that really sounds familiar. A republic is the best form of government possible on this planet. Short of heaven, this is the best possible option. But it also is the form of government that takes the most energy to upkeep. It's the hardest one to keep going. But how do we do it? Well, it says it right there in verse 21. We have to elect representatives that are capable, who fear God, who are trustworthy, and who hate dishonest gain. In fact, founding father Noah Webster, you know Noah Webster, guy that wrote the dictionary, most people only know him for that. He was a lot more than just that. But he said this, he said, when you become entitled to exercise the right of voting, in other words, when you get the opportunity to vote for public officers, let it be impressed on your mind that God commands you to choose for rulers, just men, and who will rule in the fear of God. Noah Webster, one of our founders, said, look, you're going to vote, but when you vote, you need to vote for who God tells you to vote. Just men who will fear God. He goes on and says, the preservation of a Republican government depends on the faithful discharge of this duty. In other words, you cannot have a republic if you don't do this. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Laws will be made not for the public good so much as for selfish and local purposes. Corrupt and incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws. The public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men, and the rights of the citizens will be violated and disregarded. If a Republican government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglect the divine commands and elect bad men to make and administer laws. He says if our Republican government fails, it's because the citizenry does not do their God-given assignment and elect just men who fear God. He said, this whole thing falls apart. It's your fault. There's going to be people out there that are power hungry and just want to get into office. And you have to realize that they're terrible. They're corrupt. They don't deserve to be there. They are not just men who fear God and hate dishonest gain. Do not even consider them. This Tuesday, in just 2 days, we have an opportunity to do that. We have an obligation to exercise Exodus 18:21 and vote for representatives that are capable, that are trustworthy, and God-fearing. I want you to know, elections are always low turnout events. Always. In 2020, presidential election, in 2020, there were 150 million people that voted. 150 million. There are 259 million eligible to vote. That is 58%. And that was a record-breaking election cycle. 58% is record-breaking. Midterms, like what happened last year in 2022, they're even less. Off years, like this year, 23, where it's a local election, are still fewer. In fact, there's likely going to be, when you go to and look at the thing, there's probably going to be positions open that have no one on the list. It's just going to be a blank. Write somebody in. Most people just skip it because they don't even know. Because you might win. If there's ever been a time for the Church of Jesus Christ to make an impact, it is by following this biblical example of selecting appropriate representatives. You know that at the end of every message, I challenge you to do something. I think this one's kind of obvious. I challenge you this week, for those of you that are legally able to do so, to vote on Tuesday and to take time before Tuesday. You're running out of time. Take time before Tuesday to make an informed vote. Don't just vote because the party aligns with yours. Don't just vote because you know that person. Make an informed vote based on Exodus 18:21. If nobody on that list complies to that verse, find somebody else. Maybe even convince somebody else that you know to take one of those vacant positions. Have somebody that says, you know what? There's a school board position open in the city of or in the town of Benton, and I know there's nobody in that spot. I'm on something else. They're pointing at me. But maybe thinking somebody else needs to be in that spot because we need capable men who fear God in that space. And what better way, especially in the school board spot, what better way to make an impact than to start it while they're young? All right, let's stand. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for your word. Thank you for what you say about government. Thank you that your government will never end. Lord, I pray for everyone in here who is legally able to vote, that they will do what you ask them to do in Exodus 18:21, to elect capable men who are trustworthy and who fear God. I pray that if they're in a position where they can step up and fill some of these things because they are capable and trustworthy and fear God, that they do so. But if they can't, that they find someone who is. This is the time to do it. We believe that if our government system falls, it's because we didn't do our God-given duty to elect people who look to you. Lord, I thank you for everybody here. I pray that you're with them this week and that you help them to see who you would like to be in these spots. I also pray for all the people running for all of the different positions, whether they are somebody that I agree with or that somebody else agrees with or not, is beside the point. It's a matter of, do you want them there? And Lord, no matter what they are, or what position they're in, or what party they belong to, I know that it is my job to pray for them, that they will come to you. And they will become God-fearing men who are trustworthy and who hate dishonest gain. So I pray for them now. I pray for all of us as well, that we have an amazing week until we see each other again next week. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thanks, guys.